Hello and welcome. This is the Studio Stack podcast. Each week we go behind the scenes and talk to industry leaders about what it takes to build, join, and invest in startup studios. I am your host, Deanna Lesage, and this podcast is your Startup Studio Masterclass. Today's guest is Virginia Di Paola from Fiera Studio. She's a longtime friend and a wonderful human being. Virginia started her career in institutional relations at the National Public Service. She then began traveling the world, working in international sales until a revelation in 2015 led her back to Argentina to work in tech. She joined Fiera Studio in 2021 when it was just a few months old, and she now leads partnerships and business development to help guide the implementation of new studio projects. In today's episode, we get into a lot. We talk about Fiera's unique studio model. We talk about how they work with entrepreneurs, how their small team evaluates hundreds of ideas and validates new solutions, how and why you as a studio operator should work with corporates and partner with other studios, the challenges of launching and operating a studio in a remote environment, the opportunities for innovating in Latin America, and we talk through some of the benefits of the studio model and how to kind of position your startup studio when talking to investors and corporates and entrepreneurs. This is a fantastic episode full of insight, so I'll get out of the way. Enjoy the show.
Do this, girl.
Let's do it. Hi, Virginia. Welcome to the Studio Stack podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Diana. Thank you for having me. This is such a great day. I mean, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on the very first episode. Super appreciate it. We've known each other a while. Virginia's great. I couldn't say better things about her, and Fiera Studio is super exciting. I'm glad that we get to do this and kick off the series with Fiera Studio. So the first question, or just kind of where I want to start, is how would you define a startup studio? Like when someone asks you, like, what is that? How do you answer that question?
Well, I think that the studio model, it's as much as it's not new enough, it's still new for a lot of people. So studios take different approaches to it. In our particular case, I can say that we put together a combination of company builder with the venture funding to make sure that businesses and ideas move quickly. And the elements that I think that make a very big difference in our case is the key talent and expertise that the whole team at Fiera bring to the table, plus the infrastructure available in order to significantly reduce risk, compress time, and iterate quickly so we can able to scale faster, especially in those first months of exploration, ideation, and validation of your business models. Having the chance to move quickly, I think it's very important to have all these elements combined, from what I've seen this far, I think that the team really makes a difference for us.
I couldn't agree more. I think the two things that stand out to me about that were, one, I think it's really important for everybody to know as far as studios that the team, the founders, the human capital piece of the equation is the most important part. Without that, you don't actually have anything. You just have a bunch of resources. So, whenever studios are thinking about how to recruit entrepreneurs, or even when they're thinking about working with corporates, it's kind of like, yes, the business is important, the idea is important, the thesis area is important, but the people are, the power there. And then the second piece is when you describe, what the studio does, it also you describe what the benefits of the studio model are, which is really speed and then early stage validation playbooks to go from idea to like spin out very quickly. And that's something I kind of want to touch on a little bit. What's the process for innovation within Fiera Studio? You actually on the website, and I'll leave this in the show notes, a link to the graphic, but you have this really great, like clean 5-step process approach. And I know everything doesn't always go that way, but in general, what's the approach to building ventures inside the studio?
I would say that since the very beginning, we have been working with a pipeline of ideas. I would say that right now we have at least 120 ideas with, kind of like a Twitter description. What is this? And then we have a different column where we have a ton of references in terms of the business models, or things that are doing the same but not exactly what we want to put together. So in the first place, it's about ideation. We are like always looking into the market, constantly assessing what are the necessities at this time. Of course, considering that we focus on an enterprise space, this is where we want to work in the B2B segments, creating solutions that really solve problems of other companies, no matter the size of the other enterprises, because this is where our expertise also comes from. So we're constantly assessing those opportunities and the market opportunities. So based on that, we do have kind of like from this pipeline, everything is prioritized, and they have segment 1, 2, 3, what have you, in different verticals. We try to stick to the verticals where we are more comfortable. Let's say there are business that we already know where we wouldn't enter because we don't know, and we don't feel comfortable, whereas there's businesses that maybe we're not so familiar with, like it can be new technologies like cryptocurrency or blockchain or things like this, that we are not the experts, but we know how to leverage on our network. And those are our top priorities for us at this stage. So that first step, it's ideation. That's when the whole team comes together. We do evaluations, we analyze, we bounce ideas back and forward. And of course, having that initial expertise within the team, it helps us kind of like do that first ideation and think really what that solution would look like. And we're always very aware of the business model that would go with it, because otherwise, like you can have great ideas, but if you don't know from the very beginning at least a slight idea of how you will capitalize on that, it's very difficult to move forward. And then once we have, a little bit of a clear idea, we start having conversations with existing partners and customers.
So before you build anything, you'll start to have those
Yes,
conversations.
before we build anything, usually we would work with a deck, or it's more a concept notes, where we describe it. We put a little bit of design, kind of like to say, what do you think about this? Especially, when you work with corporates and when you're thinking about solutions for the enterprise segment, you have to distribute it and get their feedback, and they said yes, maybe no, and they will add a lot of ideas. So that's, for us, it's a very wide conversation. We add up everything, and then again we start kind of like revisiting and reshaping it and assessing what needs to be cleared. Yeah.
That's a process that I think a lot of studios do follow. But I don't know that entrepreneurs themselves follow that as specifically as studios. So one of the benefits of studios is this repeatable process, and they do things a certain way because that actually proves to be the most successful way to build ventures. And so I just wanted to double tap on that and say, talking to customers intentionally with nothing built but just a deck allows you the flexibility to go back and change things before you're married to the idea, and also add things in afterwards. And so like running those problem discovery calls, running those customer discovery calls is a critical component of what sounds like your process, but I think should be, for all the entrepreneurs who are listening to this, should be a critical component of your process as well, but is much harder to do without a studio, because one of the benefits of a studio is access to the network.
Well, I remember a few years back when I started entering the innovation consultancy services spectrum, and I was learning about it. I remember a teacher that I had at my MBA, and one of the first things he said is like, the faster you can get out of the room and start talking to people, the better. So we don't wait a lot until that actually happens. Sometimes it's just one spreadsheet with like 2-3 ideas, 2-3 features, or the services that we would be providing, and we start the conversation. Because just by having that, you already get a lot of feedback and new ideas of how that will actually look like, but based on opinions or needs from people that actually have them. So it's kind of like that moment, for me, at least from what I've seen this far, that first moment, those first 3 months, 6 months tops, but it's more 3 months, 4 months. A lot of talking and conversations happen that really make a difference for us.
who does the conversations and the talking inside with Fiera specifically? Who
It depends on
has
the idea. If
like you think like studios provide a variety of resources, that designers, people that can build companies, customer segments and access to networks and things, but who inside the studio actually takes these ideas and goes and talks to the customers or the corporates in your case?
it just happened in a very organic way, I would say. Sometimes it's an actual setting up of saying, let's talk with specific customers about this. And sometimes it's just, like just real conversations with friends, colleagues, partners that we have in our ecosystem that we can access relatively easy. And just because we're having another conversation, I'll just swing it by, hey, we're working on this idea. What do you
Hmm.
think about this? And that's something that I do
So you will
myself.
actually do the conversations. You will.
I would have it, and all the partners at Fiera would have it, because again,
Okay, so everyone.
we all have different approaches to the thing. My CTO, he's super smart on technology. So he would always be looking into that aspect. Whereas maybe myself or our CEO, he's more focused on the commercial side or the business model. So again, when we all go back together with all these comments and notes, we kind of like bring inputs from very different perspectives.
Right, from your backgrounds.
Yeah, and I think that that's when we leverage on the team, because we all come from very different backgrounds. There's a significant range of ages in the team as well. So, and we always say that we
That's
like.
good. That's super important too. And I think that that's something that's interesting. Fiora does really well. You also do remote really well. And that I remember the story of, when you told me, maybe tell the story about how you thought, you'd start in this specific way inside the building, and then COVID, hit and everything, you had to go remote. But I feel like it could turn into a little bit of a competitive advantage. Tell that story. I love that one.
Well, we started remotely. I mean, there was no other way. I mean, the first conversations about Fiera, I think they happened at the end of 2019, and the partners started bouncing ideas about the model, how they wanted to move forward with the studio concept, because that was the kind of thing that we wanted to work on. The partners, they love to build companies. At the end of the day, they've already invested, created, sold, launched, failed, like they've done the whole thing. And but we all love creating them, like going through this process where you
The
really.
0 to 1. That's my favorite.
So it was at the beginning. They were thinking like we had this beautiful building, like the placing and everything was great. But pandemia came around, so the team started remotely 100%. And it was difficult, at the beginning, but I think that again, we took the time to talk with a lot of other studios as soon as we were able in 2020. I think it was around May. Or was it last year? Now I get all confused. It was last
I
year, actually,
don't even ask.
2021, that we had the chance. Some of the partners traveled to the US and met face to face with other studios. So that was kind of like new as well. We
Yeah,
introduced.
because oh, sorry, we didn't even touch on, but you guys are in Latin America, right? And building out of that ecosystem, which is, I was going to touch on the thesis a little bit too, but I think, part of the thesis is Latin America, building in Latin America, but you guys are also working with studios in the US.
Yeah.
Would love for you to touch on that a little bit as well.
Well,
Just in
the
general.
thing about Latin America, and this is something that is historic, I think, like there's a very strong relation between the US and Latin America. We've always been kind of like the backyard, like back and forward. Like everybody knows the US, everybody loves the US. Like we've all taken one or two journeys or many more to different places. So it's a market that we kind of like know and we feel comfortable working together. So most of the Latin American companies are built in Latin America, but with always a mindset for the US, because that's where like a more mature market is. So there's kind of like this thesis that if it works well in Latin America, it can work anywhere, because we don't necessarily have the same level of infrastructure or soft skills or a lot of things, that more mature economies do have. So if we make it in Latin America, we can make it anywhere. And
I just think that there's actually so much talent coming out. It's a rapidly evolving market. I hear about it constantly. And the other thing too that's interesting is I keep seeing new studios emerge in this space, which means, I don't. What do you think that means for the Latin America market? That new studios, not only new startups, but new studios are coming up
I think
often.
it's a great opportunity. It talks about, we've reached a moment. It took us a while as a community of startups and within the ecosystem, but I think that we're mature enough to understand what are our good aspects, the high spots and places and people where we can leverage on, and where are the things that we are not so good. So we've been working a lot on that, trying to combine and put together and bring in the know-how, the technology, or what have you, that we knew that we didn't have. Again, a lot of us have traveled and had experiences internationally, but I think that most of the people that I know, at least at this stage in the ecosystem in Latin America, we've all been to the US, to Europe, to the world for 5, 10 years, and then we decided to come back to Latin America. There's something related to culturally to giving back to our community, because we're committed to making a sustainable living for the more people, the better. And that
Mm-hmm.
says something about us culturally, that we're committed to a safe and healthy development for ourselves and our communities. And that's important, I think.
I think so. I think so too. And I think there are many studios in the US and abroad that are locationally focused. And I think it's an underutilized thesis. Pioneer Square Labs and Madrona Venture in Seattle, Atomic doing this in Miami, and really trying to build out that not necessarily a studio, but Capital Factory, which is
Yeah.
Studio in Austin, Texas. These kind of double down on your community theses are super interesting to me, and they're definitely working. And I think, even with the remote, it's important to make sure that you understand like what's your why for your studio. And when I do kind of intro calls with people who are thinking about launching studios, that's my first question is, always why. And if they don't have some kind of a community-based approach, I don't know how successful they're going to be. So that was one thing I love about Fiera Studio. And I think talking about or thinking about the community aspect of it, how do you work with the entrepreneurs in your ecosystem or outside of your specific region? But how do you work with entrepreneurs as a studio?
Well, I would say at the beginning we did spend some time talking with other entrepreneurs in residence that were already working with other studios or that have gone through the process, kind of like to learn a little bit about it, how they felt, how it was their experience. And then we started looking at our own patio to see where they were coming from and trying to put together the right profiles of entrepreneurs in residence that we wanted. Of course, we had a few iterations with different entrepreneurs that for whatever reason worked or did not work. So that was also like a good process of learning for ourselves. Everything again was done remotely. So the conversations needed to be very important, and a lot of trust had to be built remotely to make
Mm,
decisions about whether we want to have certain entrepreneurs in our system, in an ecosystem or not. These are
mm,
serious decisions at the end of the day, because we're just not hiring someone that you can ditch afterwards. This is a long-term commitment, a long-term partnership. We're co-founders. So this is important to have these conversations. But now I think that we're getting to a place where we feel a little bit comfortable about the kind of people that we know that we like to have within our ecosystem. And we have a good network at the end of the day, like
what do you what do you look for in founders? I think this is an important question that a lot of studios spend probably not enough time on, or spend way too much time on. I don't think you should over index it. Don't over engineer it, because then you end up with, 50 of the same entrepreneur, and that's not helpful. But if you don't spend any time thinking about it, you run that risk. And studios really are like, financial and, co-founder builders of startup studios. Like, they provide funding, but they also provide actually hands-on building. So you have to think about it like a co-founder relationship. What do you look for in the entrepreneurs that work with the studio?
I think that it's a wish list. We hope we find someone that has had previous experience as an entrepreneur. It's not that we encourage them or we value more if they fail, but I think that it's a good process of learning if you actually wanted to do your own project and you fail, because you will
And you failed? I like that criteria, the failure criteria.
value a lot the studio context, because
Right.
everything that you did on your own the first time around, now you have a full team right next to you, so that plays a
Absolutely.
totally different scheme, especially for entrepreneurs. The second element is that because we are focused on B2B enterprise segment, it's something that we wish and we hope that they've gone through their corporate experience somehow, one way or the other. So either if they liked it or not, they know why they liked it or not. So, but they have to know the process, the kind of conversations that you have to go through, buy-ins, to really make decisions with corporates. And of course, the capacity to adjust, to be flexible, if something happens, but this is kind of like standard for entrepreneurs. And then, it happened also that at some point we interview some people or had meetings with people that were coming for different reasons to the studio. And then we understood it's okay, we can have like a pipeline of entrepreneurs, but because the projects are very specific, in each one of the cases and in the projects, we will look this general profile, but with specifics on the side. And those specifics are the ones that make a difference at the end of the day. But it's not something that it's completely fulfilled. We're not 100% sure this is the way forward. I mean, we continue to iterate and to try new things.
Absolutely.
And we listen a lot, I would say, as well. We listen to people, partners, customers, because sometimes it is our partners and customers to bring us the solutions. Like, I have the
Yeah,
person for you.
let's talk about that a little bit. I love the model of how Fiera Studio works with corporates, and I think creating this is a major trend in the startup studio space, but I think it's been pioneered by some studios, yours included, of working with corporates as not an ancillary strategy, but also just kind of part of the core venture building component.
Yeah.
How does Fiera work with corporates? Who brings the idea? How do you staff the idea? Like, what's the equity share like? Tell me about the process of working with corporates.
Well, I would say that again, because it's a relatively new model in Latin America, the studios. I think it takes a specific group of corporations as well. You need to have gone through certain experience with your own innovation process. You must have failed for sure, or like you didn't know how to
Most of
do
the
it.
corporates you, most of the corporates you work with have tried to start a startup or tried to build something to solve a solution in some way,
I
or
think
to solve a problem
I
in some
would
way.
say that there's two groups of corporates. You have the ones that already have like a full innovation team that they know very quickly how to identify the new ideas and the new opportunities, and they can bring on part of their team and they know how and expertise, but they need someone to help them with the process to move faster. So they come already with a bunch of ideas, and we kind of like help them prioritize, do an initial ideation to kind of like clear that initial business model, and then we start trying out together. And then the other ones are the ones that are like one of our partners right now, customers. It's a major law firm in Latin America. I think it's going to be the first spin-off startup from a major corporate legal company, so we're very excited about that. But they don't know anything about startups, and there's no reason
Right.
why they should.
They have the domain expertise, and you have
Exactly, so in their case, they also came in with a built idea because they were very sure about what they were doing. Of course they know, but they are
of
like,
course,
I don't know what to do.
everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
They were like, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to to move it forward. We don't know how to hire the entrepreneur or the CEO that will lead this. So they understood that they needed a company builder to help them do this process. So we're bringing together both teams. They know the experts. They have the expertise on what they do. We bring the rest. And that's
Yeah.
how we managed to merge. And the teams at the beginning are very small. There's regular phone calls, kind of like to know each other. There's a lot of cultural conversation that goes in to really understand who they are and what they want. And for us, if we're co-founders, it's also a matter of saying, okay, this is a project I like. This is something that I really believe that it's going to, grow. It has long
Mm.
legs to walk, um,
Yeah.
and let's do it together. And they trust us there. That's why I think that it takes a level of maturity in your own innovation process, whatever it is, and a
Mm.
level of maturity in the amount of risk that you're willing to take in this process, because it's not for everyone.
Right. And so you kind of co-found companies with these corporate build or with these corporate organizations. Is there also a model where you build companies just kind of for them or solve a problem for them? Like I've seen in the studio space where, a big company, let's say like an HR, a big company with an HR problem, like
Yeah,
we need a talent retention solution, and they just bring this to you and they're like, we don't want really to build it, we just like kind of want to outsource that to you, and then you guys build it and kind of then co-found it with us, I guess, but more kind of build it for us, and it's not necessarily a commercial solution, it's just something they need.
yeah.
Do you see that happening?
We actually do have one case like that. In that case, we apply the same process as if it was our own startup. So we do a lot of research. We understand really the problem and what's going on in that particular scheme and situation. And then we always have checkpoints. Like after we have significant amount of information, we talk again with a partner. Okay, we understood this. We discovered this. These are our options to move forward. Are you still in? Yes, no. If there's not in, well,
So
that's
there's
it.
these kind of stage gates where
Exactly. First 3 months of work where we did that ideation and exploration, and we came up with a first solution of it. If they are interested, we move forward and we kind of like take it to the next stage. Okay, let's start building an MVP. Let's start working together. Let's identify potential entrepreneurs in residence. We do a
when
couple.
do you bring in when do you bring in that process a potential EIR or an entrepreneur who might be the CEO if it kind of works out? That doesn't sound like that's at right at the beginning. Like some studios do start there and bring that person in super early. Sounds like
I think that that's not a fixed formula because so far I've seen pretty much everything. We have two
absolutely,
startups.
yeah.
They came with the entrepreneur from the very beginning, but that's because they came with the idea and we loved it and we said, let's do this. With corporations, it can happen that they've already identified someone in their team that will be our counterpart and their lead. And we all know kind of like they will become the entrepreneur
Yeah.
in residence, and they do already have it somehow. So with corporates, I think it's a little bit easier because you do have a group of people where you can choose from an entrepreneur in residence. And if none of that is the case, when then we may put together a little bit of a profile, but we don't open up a recruiting process, a traditional recruiting process. What we do instead is we look into our network, like, okay, which vertical it is, who are our contacts there, who can bring us referrals, and that's how we start looking. I think that works better
I would agree.
than, opening up. This is a very particular profile, these candidates, they are not everywhere. They're very specific kind of people. So I don't think that you will find them in a recruiting process.
I tend to agree. I think EIR programming and recruiting is something I think a lot about. And I've seen it done both ways where you just kind of post this job open role. I mean, I have a newsletter. I post open roles in, the newsletter at the bottom each week. And I don't see as many. I see a lot of like designer in residence,
Yeah.
a lot of CFO, like a lot of specific, segment focused, talent focused roles, but the EIR for hire or the kind of CEO for hire almost never works because you need to identify that person from such a specific level that you really have to think about what you need and then go out into the market and find that person. And a lot of times they already have a job, like they're already
Yeah,
doing something.
exactly.
It's not like you found their resume somewhere. You need to identify the top talent person out there in the market.
And
Like,
the last thing I will say, yeah, the other place where we also have found them, it's our own team. I mean,
oh yeah,
everybody at Fiera, at the end of the day, the people that we bring to our own team, they have to be somehow a little bit of an entrepreneur, these kind of people that are naturally curious, that are willing to play an extra game, just to see what's the difference between one solution or the other. That's something that it's kind of like in principle and values in who we are. So, for instance, one of the startups that we're working on that comes from our studio, it was brought by one of our product owners. He came with the idea. He came with the
The
idea.
studio.
He introduced it to his manager, which is our CTO. The CTO loved it, and Mariano, he took it to the CEO and the meeting with the rest of the partners. They said this is something interesting. They started exploring, and now we're already doing first iterations and first tryouts in the market. It's still, like completely off, but it came from our team.
That's great. I think that that is the value. That's a lot of times, people ask me what's the difference between startup studio, accelerator, venture capital. It's the human capital, the core team of the studio, because 9 times out of 10, they are very hands-on, sometimes even the leaders of a startup. And very often in the beginning are the leaders of a startup until they bring in an EIR to either replace, but sometimes they don't. Like, there's plenty of examples of studios where the CEO of the studio, or somebody high up level in the C suite of the studio, takes over an idea and is kind of becomes the CEO and runs it out of the studio, and they'll find somebody to kind of replace them on the team, but that was the right person
Yeah.
to be the CEO of that company. It happens in studios so much more often than accelerators, venture capital.
But that's why this conversation started. And what are the main elements in our studio model? Where the main elements are, we are a company builder, we provide venture funding, but for us, key talent and expertise around the teams, it's very important, this expertise, experience of traveling the world, building, failing a few times each one of us already, it gives us something else. It gives us an edge that I don't think I have seen in other kinds of companies. And that's from my personal experience, that I've been
I think
around, I've traveled around.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that, and that's a great lesson for any studio operators, or emerging studio operators on the line or listening. It's about who you bring into the team, the level of startup that you'll be able to build. The success of any company that will come out of your studio is a direct result of the people that you bring into your team.
Think
In
so.
the core team.
Yeah,
So
definitely. And
really
again,
powerful.
it wasn't easy at the beginning because we were doing everything remotely. Most of the team still it's remote, working remotely, because here in Argentina, when most of our operations are based, we just are finishing like third wave or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So
No.
so during this like December, January, February, everybody went back home, and only now we're going back to the office, like, so it's hard to be working like this. But because we talk a lot to people, I have to say this, like we do spend time talking to each other, listening to new ideas inside the team, and I think that in that respect, our hiring process for our regular team, it's working well. I think that everybody has the same problem these days, finding the right people, having them to stay, but because we are building this culture around it of opportunities that you can actually leverage on that on yourself, this is doing, and it's a combination of young people with a little bit older ones that we've done a little bit more of work already,
I do love the age, the specific focus on, diverse age, and this kind of pairing newer people with more experienced people, because definitely, I mean, both groups have things to learn from each other, and that's really important. Um, but yeah, no, I love that. I think that's a good way to wrap up. As far as anybody can, I know you're looking for corporates to work with, also studios in the in the U.S., across the globe. Like Fiera is a very collaborative studio, looking
yeah,
to
definitely.
kind of develop partnerships with corporates, other studios. So where would be the best place to find you, or
Well,
get in touch
definitely
with
our
you?
webpage is kind of like our first contact, like we are not very high profile. We do our work like little ants, like nobody's listening or paying attention, but that's kind of like an entry point. Otherwise, it's Virginia at fierastudio.com. relatively easy. Yes, we're already partnering up with a bunch of studios in the US, building shared teams of sales and marketing to deliver services for all of our startups instead of like
Mm,
building multiple teams. Let's just build one very strong team
that is smart.
to work. So we're doing that. We're providing agile squads and for other studios as well in the US that don't have the development capacity inside their own studio. So we're working with them, and in some cases already exploring potential, synergies in building startups together. And with corporates, we're mainly building startups with them together. So it is quite an adventure. We're learning a lot from our customers, our partners. They tell us this is right, this is not so right, and we
So,
try to listen and learn all the time.
constant evolution.
Yeah,
You'll never stop. But as long as you're open to listening and learning, I think you'll definitely succeed. Well, thank you so much for joining the Studio Stack podcast. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on as
thank you for
episode number
having
one.
me.
Learned so much from you, and I'll catch up with you right after this.
Thank you very much, Diana.